Good morning, Year 5, and today brings us to the penultimate lesson in our newspaper article writing journey. We're going to be looking today at how to use the passive voice when drafting a newspaper article. So we've looked at the passive voice previously, and actually the passive voice is often used in newspaper articles. It's just a way of really increasing that formal tone within a piece of writing. So it's not necessarily every sentence, but passive voice sentences will be dropped in every now and again just to keep the tone really formal. So what's important to remember when we look at the passive voice is that we've got two kind of main types of sentences, the active voice and the passive voice. And for this we need to remember the terms subject, verb and object. The subject is who we are talking about in a sentence. Verb, or the doing word of the sentence, which tells you what the subject is up to, and the object, this is the thing that the verb is working on. For example, Gary was eating a choc ice. So in this sentence we have got the subject. Have a little think, who is it we are talking about in this sentence? That's right, it's Gary. Brilliant. And what is the doing word, the action in this sentence? Have a little look. Great stuff. It's eating. Well done. So our subject is Gary. Our verb is eating. So our object, what is it that Gary is eating? A choc ice. Absolutely. Brilliant. Great job. Okay, let's look at this next sentence, this next slide. If we're going to turn these active voice sentences into the passive voice sentences, we need to kind of flip the order in which they're written. So, the active voice sentence, Gary was eating a choc ice, becomes a choc ice was being eaten by Gary. What do you notice is the same? What's different? And I want you to think carefully about the word order here. Okay. Hopefully you spotted that we need to put the object at the start of a sentence with the passive voice and say what is happening to it and by whom or sometimes by what. So on your task sheet, task 1 will help you to practice the skill of turning the active voice into the passive voice. And you've got an example here. The active voice is Dad watched the TV, and the passive voice is the TV was watched by Dad. The word by is really useful. And remember, when we've looked at passive voice before, a little trick to remember that is if you can say by zombies at the end of the sentence, it makes sense, okay, as passive voice. So, Simon Cowell played the X Factor contestant. Our subject is Simon Cowell. The verb is glared, and the object is the X Factor contestant. So we need to flip the order and put the word by into that sentence. Have a little go at a few of those for me. Okay. Here's an example of a couple of passive voice sentences that are within the Waggle text that you've got in your Monday resource pack. Now, as you can see, not every sentence is passive voice, but they're just littered throughout the newspaper article in order to keep that tone nice and formal. With a newspaper article, it sort of changes it from being that story, or almost like a recount, like a diary or something like that, to make the reader take that step back. So, have a look at the examples here. You might want to pause the video. And just get those in your mind, because we're going to start writing our own examples in a moment. Here we've got task 2 from our task sheet for today, and you are going to write your own passive voice sentences about these things. So you can actually draft your own additional examples, of course, but these are just some structured and scaffolded ones for you should you need them. The tip is on there. If it helps to write the active voice sentence first and then change it to the passive. Now obviously I haven't given you a sentence here, I've literally given you the subject, the verb and the object. So rocket landed surface of moon doesn't make sense as a sentence. It would be the rocket landed on the surface of the moon. But if we want to change that to the passive voice, we need to put the object first, and we need to add a determiner before that. So the surface of the moon was landed on by the rocket. Okay, so we've got additional words in that sentence to make sure that it actually makes sense. It's not just a cluster of words. When you come to have a go at this task, I want you to think about that too. And you can obviously, if you had a go at these and you want to have a go at a couple of more examples of your own, by all means feel free to do so. So the main bulk of the lesson today, once we've got through the passive voice sentences, is for you to create a draft of your newspaper article. Now, I want you to consider the layout features that we looked at the start of the week, and I think it's really important that you go back and revise them just to make sure that you're using them in your own work. Our keys to success then, obviously these are the skills that we've focused on this week. It's using multi-clause sentences, and within that making sure commas are used accurately, using dialogue. This is direct speech with correct inverted commas, and reported speech, which is with a paraphrased speech that doesn't necessarily need those inverted commas. The use of the passive voice. And in addition, I want you to think about using sentence openers to vary sentences to make sure that they're a little bit more exciting. We don't need them for every sentence, but as you work through the text and your draft, go back and think, do my sentences all start in the same way? Can I vary this in some way, shape or form? And I know we've done lots and lots on I space openers for those fronted adverbials, so have a little think about that. For your final paragraph, and we haven't looked a great deal at this, you might want to refer to the waggle. I want you to think for that final paragraph, what next? Once the astronauts have landed on the surface of the moon, what were the hopes of the world for those astronauts? What did they hope would happen? Did they hope that they'd stay there forever, for instance? And what did they hope would happen? And that's what you need to do. So your tense will need to shift during that particular paragraph to make it make sense. Obviously this is a draft, so what I'd encourage you to do is to write it out and have a look at then going back and editing it, coming back to this slide and checking off that we've got all of our keys to success included. Some of the other things you might like to consider within your draft are things like the headline and the byline. So the headline doesn't use determiners often. It doesn't use words in front of nouns. Instead of saying the rocket, it just might say rocket or stuff like things like that. Your byline should be by you. So think about how you can incorporate your own headline and byline into your work. Enjoy writing. We look forward to reading them. Thank you. Bye bye.